My name is Julia Winters, and I've spent my life perfecting recipes, but starving for the one ingredient I could never have gotten in any way: the heartfelt approval of my family. The irony doesn't escape me. I can turn raw ingredients into dishes that make strangers melt with pleasure, but I've never been able to create anything that would make my parents look at me the way they look at my brother and sister. Standing in my professional kitchen on Christmas morning, meticulously arranging truffles imported from France for a family that had treated me like a minor character for 35 years, I still believed that if I tried harder, if this meal was perfect enough, they would finally see me. How many times can your heart break before you accept that some hunger will never be satisfied? Before I tell you what happened when I discovered how invisible I really was to them, let me go back to the origins of this pattern, the little girl who thought that if she cooked something good enough, her family would finally offer her a seat at the table of their affection. Do you know the feeling of putting in more and more effort, but absolutely nothing changes in the eyes of the people most important to you? Like you're trying to fill a well with no bottom? Growing up between my older brother Michael and younger sister Rebecca, I was always the one who was easiest to overlook. Michael was the golden child, with his brilliant grades and drive for engineering. Rebecca was the little princess, bright and dramatic, her artistic abilities always admired. And I was, just Julia. Calm, reliable, average. My accomplishments were consistently overshadowed. I remember in 7th grade, I won the school spelling bee. When I came home with the certificate, I showed it to my mom, who took one glimpse and said, "That's nice, honey," before returning to sewing sequins onto Rebecca's dance costume. 2 weeks earlier, Michael's science fair win had been celebrated with dinner at an expensive restaurant for the whole family. I quietly hung my certificate on the refrigerator, where it hung for 3 days before disappearing under a magnet with Rebecca's dance performance schedule. It was in the kitchen that I first felt a glimmer of what might have been recognition. I was about 10 when I made my first real chocolate cupcakes, not from a box, but from a recipe in my grandmother's old cookbook. The family really responded. "This is amazingly delicious, Julia," my dad said, taking a second one. It was like a sip of water in the desert. From then on, I started cooking more and more often, studying cookbooks, experimenting with recipes, watching cooking shows when no one was occupying the TV. The kitchen became my sanctuary and testing ground, a place where I felt competent, creative, and most importantly, visible, at least when I brought finished dishes to the table. Those brief moments of recognition became everything to me. "Julia, this is amazing. Where did you learn to cook this? You should make this for your father's birthday." By the time I was 16, I was sure cooking was my calling. I remember sitting at the dining room table, nervously clutching the culinary school brochure. "I've decided to apply to culinary school," I announced, trying to make my voice sound more confident than I felt. Dad snorted, not taking his eyes off the paper. "Cooking is a hobby, not a career." "Actually, it's a growth industry," I insisted, pointing to the employment figures page. Mom threw me a sympathetic look. "Honey, do you really want to spend your whole life standing at the stove? It's such hard work for so little money." Their reaction set a pattern that persisted for years. His parents paid for Michael's engineering education at a prestigious technical institute. They funded Rebecca's marketing program, plus her apartment in a trendy neighborhood, because she needed to build the right connections. But when it came to my culinary education, they flatly refused to contribute even a penny. "We're not going to spend money on something you can learn at home," my father declared. "If you're so set on this blight, pay for it yourself." So I did. I worked as a waitress in the mornings and a cook's helper in the evenings, studying between shifts. There were days when I was so tired I fell asleep at my books. There were moments when I wondered if they were right. Maybe I was chasing a foolish dream. But then I remembered the quiet satisfaction I felt in creating a dish from scratch, transforming simple ingredients into something that elicited smiles and delighted sighs. It never felt like just a hobby. It felt like a calling. After graduating from culinary school with honors, I invited my family to my graduation. They came, but left before I could introduce my teachers to them. Rebecca had an audition for a commercial that day, which, according to her mom, just couldn't be missed. Creating my catering business was a 5-year struggle of 70-hour work weeks and constant financial uncertainty. I saved money on everything, ate leftovers from the events I catered, and put every extra dollar back into the business. Gradually, my reputation grew. I went from small private dinners to catering corporate events, birthday parties, and eventually weddings. During the same period, Michael received seed money from our parents for his technology venture, an investment in his future, as my father put it. Rebecca got their support through 2 career changes, first acting, then graphic design, then marketing. She's just looking for her place in the world, her mom defended her. When I called, asking for a small loan during a particularly difficult month, a major client canceled a major order at the last minute, leaving me with ingredients paid for and no income. My father gave me a lecture on financial responsibility. "Your problem, Julia, is that you never think ahead," he said with a heavy sigh. "You can't expect us to bail you out every time your little project runs into difficulties. Maybe it's time to think about a real job." Little project. That's what they always called it, despite the fact that by the time I was 30, I was catering prestigious events around town, had a staff of 5, and was mentioned in a regional culinary magazine as a rising star in the local food scene. To them, it was always just a hobby, something I did until I grew up and did something real. I once asked my mom why they never took my career seriously. "Oh, Julia," she sighed, patting my hand. "You're always so dramatic. We just want you to be happy and provided for. Cooking is fine for a household, but it's not what the future is built on." That phrase, dramatizing, was a constant refrain in my life. If I expressed frustration or pain, I was dramatizing. If I talked about my accomplishments, I was bragging. If I asked for recognition, I was ungrateful. Family gatherings became exercises in frustration. Like the time I drove 4 hours to join an Easter celebration, only to discover they had rescheduled it for the previous day without letting me know. When I called to ask why, my mom dismissively said, "We assumed you were too busy with your little food business to join us anyway." Or the time I made a special cake for my father's 60th birthday, spending hours creating a replica of his first fondant car, only to see it put to the side, barely incised, because Rebecca had ordered his favorite cake from a local bakery, a cake he'd never mentioned as a favorite before. Despite all this, I kept trying. That's the funny thing about family dynamics, how deeply ingrained the need for parental approval is, even when the rational part of you knows you'll probably never get it. I kept cooking for family gatherings, coming up with increasingly elaborate dishes, hoping the next one would be something that would make them notice, make them proud. With each ignored accomplishment, with each devalued success, with each family gathering where I was asked to help in the kitchen, but rarely asked about my life, a pattern formed. A pattern in which I was a background character in my own family's story. Comfortable, but not necessary. Present, but not visible. Even as my business grew, recognition didn't come. I catered events for local celebrities, got an offer to write a food column for the town newspaper, expanded my team to 10 people. All of this was met with the same polite indifference. "Very nice, dear," my mom would say, quickly shifting the conversation to Michael's new job or Rebecca's latest romantic infatuation. My father didn't even try to hide his disdain. "Still playing with your food?" he asked on our rare encounters, as if I were a kid with a baking kit rather than the owner of a successful business. Perhaps most painful was the realization that the only thing I was truly useful to them for was cooking for family gatherings. I was always asked to bring the main course or dessert, but rarely asked about my life or business. My value to them was limited to what I could put on the table, not who I was as a person. And yet, I kept hoping, kept believing that the next meal, the next success, the next accomplishment would be the thing that would finally break down the wall between us. That one day, they would see me, really see me, and be proud. Now, looking back, I see how deeply I internalized the idea that my value as a person was tied to their approval. Every new recipe, every menu, every culinary creation wasn't just a professional endeavor. It was a desperate attempt to earn a seat at the family table, where there always seemed to be one less chair than needed. Standing in my kitchen that Christmas morning, I was at the peak of my career. My business was thriving. I was recognized in the culinary community, and I had a team of talented people who respected my vision and skill. And yet, there I was, still trying to make a dish perfect enough to earn my family's love. as if I could just find the right combination of flavors, the perfect balance of textures, the flawless presentation, it would somehow fill the void that had existed between us my entire life. The little girl who once believed she could cook her way to love and acceptance grew into a woman who had to finally realize the bitter truth. Some hungers cannot be quenched, no matter how well you cook. You know how sometimes it feels like things are finally starting to change for the better? Like after years of being unrecognized, there's suddenly a glimmer of hope? That's exactly what I felt 3 months ago at my cousin Emily's wedding, which I catered as chef and owner of a catering company. It was a gorgeous September event at the Country Club, 200 guests, a 4-tiered menu, a team of 12 under my direction. I put special care into this event, not only because Emily was one of the few relatives who actually supported my business, but also because I knew my whole family would be there, watching. As I walked out of the kitchen during the main course to see if everything was okay, I overheard my dad talking to one of his old friends. "How are your kids doing, Thomas?" his friend asked. "Michael recently got a promotion at his technology company," my father began with his usual pride. "Rebecca is managing a marketing campaign for a new startup." Then, to my surprise, he pointed in my direction. "And this is my daughter, the chef. She's in charge of tonight's magnificent dinner." Chef. Not Julia who cooks, not our Julia, still playing around with her little business. Chef. A professional title, spoken with a tinge of what could only be pride. I felt something warm blossom inside me, the hope I'd suppressed for so long. Maybe they were finally starting to see me? Maybe years of hard work, building a reputation, growing a business, had finally convinced them that my career was real, worthy of respect. At the end of the evening, as the guests began to disperse, my mother approached me in the kitchen where I was supervising the packing of equipment. "Julia, that was amazing," she said, fixing her perfect hair. Everyone couldn't stop talking about the food. "Thanks, Mom," I replied, trying not to look too eager for her approval. "Dad and I are thinking about Christmas," she continued, shifting into her usual role as family coordinator. "We'll probably have about 30 people this year." Without thinking, I made a suggestion. I could make a holiday dinner, as my gift to everyone. I immediately mentally prepared myself for a polite rejection, a comment about it being too much work, or that my Aunt Carol always cooks turkey. Instead, Mom's face brightened. "That would be wonderful, Julia. Everyone always loves your cooking." Her words ignited a new flame of determination in me. This was my chance to create the most memorable Christmas feast they had ever experienced. A true statement of my worth and love, expressed through the only language my family seemed to be able to appreciate me in, through food. I devoted the next 3 months to planning this dinner with the kind of meticulousness I usually reserved for my most prestigious clients. I created a spreadsheet tracking each family member's preferences and dietary restrictions, from Uncle Robert's lactose intolerance to my cousin Ashley's veganism to my father's aversion to fennel. I researched recipes that would impress, but also comfort and warm. Dishes that would be visually stunning, but also carry a nostalgic element that would evoke memories of Christmases past. I wanted it to be not just a dinner, but an experience, a connection, a moment they would all remember. For that sake, I began my search for the most exceptional ingredients. I ordered a historic breed of turkey from a small family farm 200 kilometers from the city, where the birds were raised free-range and fed organic grain. Found a supplier who could deliver fresh, hand-picked wild mushrooms, imported truffles from France, an extravagance I usually saved for my wealthiest clients. "Are you sure you want to put that much into a family dinner?" Maria, my sous chef and right-hand woman, asked when she saw the list of ingredients. "It's going to cost you a fortune." "It's important," I replied, without going into detail about how important it was to me emotionally. Maria, as one of the few people who actually knew about my complicated relationship with my family, simply nodded understandingly. For the sake of this dinner, I had canceled 2 major corporate events that conflicted with my training days, a financial sacrifice my business could barely afford, especially in December, the most profitable month of the year. But I told myself it was worth it. That it was an investment not just in a family dinner, but in a new relationship with my family. Christmas morning, After barely 3 hours of sleep following 18 hours of final preparations, I stood in front of the mirror, applying makeup before delivering the feast. My kitchen was filled with stainless steel containers, each perfectly packed and labeled. The smell of slow-roasted turkey cured in a special brine filled the space. It was then that the notification on my phone rang. I usually ignored social media on busy workdays, but when I saw my mother's name, I automatically checked it. My mother had posted a photo with the caption, "Only our most favorite people gathered together for our pre-Christmas celebration." In the photo was my entire family, my parents, Michael and Rebecca, nieces, nephews, aunts, uncles, cousins, and even my grandmother, who rarely left her nursing home, all in matching holiday sweaters, smiling and celebrating in my parents' living room the previous evening. Everyone was there, except for me. Maybe you know that feeling, the moment when something you've suspected deep inside but denied suddenly becomes an undeniable reality. It's like discovering that the ground beneath you isn't actually solid but illusory, and you're already falling. The revelation hit me physically. My stomach clenched as if I had been punched. My hands shook so violently that I dropped my mascara brush. My breath came in short, painful gasps as I was confronted with an irrefutable message. I was not categorized as a favorite or someone who mattered. I scrolled through the comments under the photo, looking for any mention of me. Maybe someone asked, "Where's Yulia?" Maybe there was some comment about how sorry I was unable to join. Nothing. Not one person mentioned my absence. Not one person asked why I wasn't there. It was as if I didn't exist in their concept of family at all. I scrolled through chats with my mom and other family members over the past few weeks. In none of them was there any mention of a pre-Christmas celebration. Not a single invitation that I might have missed. Not a single hint that such an event was being planned. They just didn't think to invite me. In that moment, the truth I had tried to deny for so long became crystal clear. It wasn't that I was invisible. Invisibility implies that someone is at least trying to look. It was that they actively chose not to include me, in their sweaters, in their photography, in their concept of who constitutes most favorite people. And yet, here I stood, after 3 sleepless months of planning, after giving up thousands of dollars in potential income, after 18 hours of cooking, all for people who didn't even think to include me in their celebration. The bitter irony didn't escape me. I was cooking for a family gathering I wasn't even invited to, cooking to impress people who didn't even think my presence could be valuable at their real celebration. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, a woman who had spent her entire life trying to earn a seat at a table where she was never wanted. A woman who had convinced herself that if she just cooked with enough love, with enough skill, it would somehow overcome years of neglect. It was then that I realized that there was no prescription that could heal this particular wound. If you've ever felt rejected by your own family, if you've ever felt the pain of realizing that the people who should love you the most are actually more easily able to do without you, know that you're not alone. Sometimes the most painful epiphanies lead to the most profound transformations. What happened to the Christmas feast I had so carefully prepared? How did this revelation change my path? Subscribe to my channel to hear the continuing story of how one painful moment of truth became the beginning of my true liberation. Give this video a like if you too have gone through a moment of clarity that changed your perception of a long-standing relationship. And share in the comments, how did you deal with the realization that you weren't appreciated where you most craved recognition? There are moments when clarity comes like a flash of lightning, suddenly illuminating everything that had been hidden in the shadows of self-deception. Looking at a picture of my family's most favorite people, I felt the last wall of denial that I had worked so hard to build over the years crumble. The truth about the place I held in their lives, or rather, the place I didn't have, became crystal clear. I looked at the sumptuous feast I had labored over for 3 months. Golden-crusted turkey, truffle mashed potatoes made from potatoes grown on an organic farm, hand-picked wild mushroom sauce. All of these exquisite dishes that I had created with so much love and hope suddenly seemed like empty symbols of the endless pursuit of unattainable approval. With newfound clarity about my family's true feelings, I made a decision that changed everything. Instead of delivering this sumptuous feast to the people who had excluded me, I picked up the phone and dialed the number of Maria, my sous chef, and closest associate for the past 7 years. "Maria, there's been a change of plans," I said, surprised at the calmness in my voice. "We're not taking dinner to my family, we're taking it to the House of Hope shelter." A short pause followed. Mary, who had seen me in moments of triumph and despair, who knew more about my complicated family dynamics than anyone else, simply said, "I'll be at your place in 20 minutes. I'll call the others." Within an hour, my kitchen had become a command center. My staff, sensing that something significant had happened, but being too professional to pry, worked efficiently to customize packaging for transport to the shelter. Stainless steel containers were replaced with disposable trays that are easier to dispense. We reorganized portions to feed more people. "Everyone will get their full day's pay," I announced to the team, plus holiday bonuses from my personal account. No one objected to the sudden change of plans on Christmas morning. Instead, I noticed something akin to respect in their eyes. Perhaps they'd always seen what I tried so hard to hide from myself, how one-sided my relationship with my family was. As I helped coordinate the redirection of all the food, I experienced a strange mixture of grief and release. I mourned the family relationship I'd always wanted, but never had. That idealized version where my parents are proud of my accomplishments, where my brother and sister value my contributions, where I belong to a circle of most favorite people. And yet, at the same time, I felt lighter than I had in years. Like I had finally shed the heavy backpack I had been lugging around for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. Decades of trying to earn the approval of those who weren't capable of giving it had drained me in ways I was only now beginning to realize. "Are you okay?" Maria asked quietly as we loaded the last of the containers into the vans. I thought for a moment. "No," I answered honestly, "but I think I will." The drive to the House of Hope shelter was quiet. I sat in the passenger seat, looking out the window at the Christmas decorations whizzing by, at the families rushing by with gifts, at this holiday that has always been an exercise in unfulfilled hope for me. The director of the shelter, a woman named Elena, greeted us with incredulous amazement. "When your sous chef called, I thought it was some kind of joke," she admitted. "We usually get leftovers or a simple meal for Christmas, but never anything like this." As we laid out the dishes in the shelter's dining room, something in me began to heal. The food I had prepared with such care still found its purpose, not as a tool for unattainable approval, but as a gift for those who would truly appreciate it. By noon, as we finished setting out the food, the residents of the shelter began to gather. Their faces at the sight of the feast said more than my family's words of approval ever could. There was no expectation or history of disappointment here, just genuine gratitude for the unexpected joy. By mid-afternoon, my phone was bursting with increasingly desperate messages from my family. They began with innocent questions about arrival times. "What time do you plan to arrive with food, dear?" Mom wrote at 11 in the morning. By 12:30, the tone had changed. "Julia, everyone is hungry and waiting. Please tell me you are on your way." By 2 o'clock, the messages had morphed into expressions of embarrassment and accusation. "This is extremely unprofessional, Julia. Everyone is waiting." "I can't believe you're letting us down like this." "Rebecca suggests ordering pizza. Is this really what you wanted for the family's Christmas dinner?" What struck me most was the complete lack of concern for my well-being. Not one of them asked if I was okay. Didn't inquire if something was wrong. To them, it wasn't about the person, it was about the inconvenience. Further confirmation that my value to them lay solely in the services I could provide. I was helping distribute food to the residents of the shelter when Rebecca called. I rejected the call. Then Michael called. I rejected it. Then Mom, then Dad. I put the phone on silent and continued serving dinner. Every smile, every thank you, every delighted sigh over my food at the shelter felt more genuine than years of hollowed-out compliments from my family. There was no subtext here, no history of resentment, no inevitable comparison to Michael's accomplishments or Rebecca's dramas. Just a moment of genuine human connection through the food I'd created. When I finally called my parents that night, I was calm and confident in my decision. My father answered almost instantly, his voice barely containing his anger. "Julia, finally, do you have any idea what you've done? The whole family has been waiting for hours." He made it sound like I was late for the meeting rather than making a conscious decision not to come at all. I heard my mom intercept the phone. "I've never been so embarrassed in my life," she stated dramatically. "We gave you this opportunity to showcase your small business to your family, and you let everyone down." Small business. Even now, after all these years, their lack of concern for me as a person only confirmed that I'd made the right decision. "I saw your most favorite people picture," I said quietly. A heavy silence hung in the air. I could almost imagine them exchanging glances, realizing they'd been caught. "Oh, this?" Mom finally replied, her voice suddenly becoming excused. "It was just a chance encounter, nothing serious." "You're overreacting," Dad interjected. "It was just a spontaneous meeting. Not everything is always about you, Julia." Their attempts to downplay and blame me were so predictable, I almost smiled. I'd accepted this dynamic for so long, allowed them to rewrite reality so that they would always turn out to be right, and I would always turn out to be overly sensitive or selfish. "It's not about one signature or one meeting," I said firmly. "It's about an entire life where I was an afterthought to the family. It's about the fact that I've always been excluded, ignored, or invited out of a sense of obligation, not because you really wanted to see me." "That's ridiculous," Mom protested, but her voice trembled, betraying uncertainty. "Is it?" I asked. "Then why didn't any of you call to see if I was okay? Why were all your messages about being uncomfortable instead of worrying that something might have happened to me?" Dad tried to go on the offensive. "You ruined Christmas dinner over some petty grudge. It's just—" "The food wasn't missing," I interrupted him. "I took it to the House of Hope shelter. It was appreciated there by people who were really grateful." "You did what?" Mom's voice rose an octave. "Instead of wasting it on people who only see me as a catering service, I shared it with people to whom it truly brought joy." Another pause followed, longer this time. I could almost hear them digesting the information, realizing that something had fundamentally changed, that I was no longer playing by their rules. "Julia," Mom finally said, her voice softer, perhaps realizing that she was losing control of the situation. "I don't understand why you're so upset. We've always supported you." "No," I objected firmly. "You've always supported Michael and Rebecca. Me, you've tolerated me. There's a difference." "That's not fair," Dad protested. "Fair," I replied. "You paid for Michael's education, but you made me work 2 jobs to pay for culinary school. You gave Rebecca money for an apartment, but lectured me on financial responsibility when I needed a small loan for my business. You celebrate their every accomplishment, but treat my career like a hobby. And now you're having a family gathering with your most favorite people and didn't even think to invite me." My voice remained steady, though emotions raged inside. It wasn't just anger, it was something more complex. Relief at having spoken the truth, sadness at having to say it at all, and a strange, unexpected sense of strength, born of the decision to no longer accept treatment I didn't deserve. Do you know what happens when you finally stop trying to fit into a frame that was never made for you? In the weeks following the Christmas confrontation, I found myself in an emotional storm that was both liberating and frightening. The euphoria of showing courage was replaced by deep grief for the family relationship I never had, but had always dreamed of. The first few days were the hardest. I woke up with the painful realization of loss, not physical death, but the destruction of the illusion I had held onto for so long. The illusion that if I tried hard enough, if I cooked gourmet enough meals, if I achieved enough success, my family would finally love me the way I had always wanted to be loved. "How are you holding up?" Jessica, my best friend since culinary school, asked the week after Christmas. We sat in her cozy living room, both of us with our hands around steaming mugs of tea, as if trying to warm ourselves from the cold of reality. "Honestly, I don't know," I replied, surprised at how easy honesty was now. "Sometimes I feel so relieved that I don't have to play this role anymore, and sometimes I wake up in tears, missing the family I never had." It was Jessica who convinced me to see a therapist. "You would never cook a complicated dish without a recipe," she reasoned. "So what makes you think you can handle all this emotional restructuring on your own?" That's how I found myself in the office of Dr. Patricia Mills, a calm woman with penetrating eyes and a way of asking questions that got right to the heart of the problem. "How do you feel when you think about your decision to redirect the holiday dinner?" she asked in our first session. "Regret, no," I answered after a pause. "Uncertainty, also no. More like affirmation, like I've finally done something I should have done a long time ago." Over the following weeks, with the help of Dr. Mills, I began the challenging work of setting boundaries and building a life that didn't revolve around seeking approval from the people who held it back. Each session brought new revelations about how deeply ingrained the behaviors of seeking parental approval were. "What would your life look like if you stopped seeking parental approval?" Dr. Mills asked one day when we were discussing my pursuit of excellence in all aspects of cooking. The question stunned me so much that I fell into silence. Finally, I admitted, "I honestly don't know. Their approval has been my guiding light for so long, even when I realized it was leading me in circles." That question was the beginning of a journey of deconstructing the person I had become in a desperate attempt to gain family approval and discovering who I could have been without that driving force. "Think of it like creating a new recipe," Dr. Mills suggested. "You start with the basic ingredients, your true values, tastes, desires, and create something that nourishes you, not others." Gradually, I began to redirect the emotional energy I used to spend chasing parental approval into creative menu development and building genuine connections with my clients. Instead of planning dishes that would impress my family, I experimented with combinations that intrigued me. Instead of using cooking as a way to earn love, I returned to its original joy, the opportunity to create something authentic and share it with others. To my surprise, the business blossomed. My newfound creative freedom caught the attention of an influential food blogger who wrote a rave review of a private dinner I hosted. "There's a kind of new boldness in winter's dishes, a freedom that turns every bite into an exploration of flavor," he wrote. That review brought a wave of new clients, and within months I was booking events a year in advance. I had to expand to a larger commercial kitchen and hired 2 full-time employees. Business grew faster than when I was desperately trying to prove my worth through culinary success. Paradoxically, I remarked in one of my sessions with Dr. Mills, once I stopped using my cooking as a tool to gain approval, people began to value it more. "That's not a paradox," she replied with a soft smile. "When you create from a place of authenticity rather than desperation, it resonates with people on a whole different level." My personal transformation mirrored my professional success. I began to set boundaries in other relationships where I was undervalued. Friends who only connected when they needed free food for events. Acquaintances who always assumed I would change my plans to fit in with theirs. I stopped accepting last-minute requests that disrupted my schedule by learning to say, "Unfortunately, this doesn't fit into my calendar, but I can suggest the following options," instead of the automatic, "Sure, I'll rearrange everything." The hardest, but ultimately most liberating, was raising my prices to reflect the true value of my work rather than understating them to make people love me. I remember my hands shaking as I updated the numbers on my website, expecting a wave of rejections. Instead, something amazing happened. The clients who valued quality and creativity stayed and were willing to pay a fair price. The ones who left were mostly the ones who were always trying to squeeze more out of me for less. By setting healthy boundaries, you actually attract people who respect those boundaries, Dr. Mills explained, and you filter out those who don't respect them. It's not a loss, it's a refinement. Perhaps the most unexpected development was the creation of a support group I called Family of Choice. It started as informal dinners I hosted for a small group of people I met through therapy who were also struggling with difficult family relationships. We got together once a month, sharing food, stories, and support. "I thought my experience was unique," I confessed at one of the meetings. "That only my family functioned this way, that I was the only one who wasn't good enough to deserve their unconditional love." "Oh, honey," replied Diane, a writer in her 60s who hadn't spoken to her brother in decades. "That's the biggest trick of dysfunctional families, to make you think you're the problem." As the group grew, I discovered that my story was far from unique. So many people struggled with conditional love, emotional neglect, and unequal treatment of siblings, and each carried their own hunger for acceptance that was never quenched, regardless of their accomplishments. In these shared stories, in this mutual support, I discovered that meaningful bonds can be built on mutual respect, not biological ties. That true family can be created, not just inherited. That we can choose people who see us, appreciate us, and rejoice in our success without envy or conditions. When you stop expecting nutritious food from an empty refrigerator, I said in one of our meetings, using a culinary metaphor that seemed appropriate, you are freed up to find real nutritious food elsewhere. About 6 months after the Christmas incident, I realized that I no longer woke up every morning with the weight of unrecognition. My first thought was no longer about how I could earn parental approval or prove my worth. Instead, I discovered a new freedom, the freedom to cook things that brought me joy, to build relationships that were mutually supportive, and finally to stop starving for approval that never satiated. One day, Dr. Mills asked me, "Julia, if you could say something to that little girl who was trying so desperately to earn a seat at the family table, what would you say to her?" I thought for a moment, feeling tears gathering in the corners of my eyes. I would tell her that she's always deserved a seat at the table, and that if there's no room for her at the existing table, she can create her own table, with better food and people who really want her. If you recognize yourself in this story, if you too have struggled for the approval that always seems to slip away, know that you are not alone. Perhaps the real revolution comes not when we force others to see our value, but when we finally see it for ourselves and set boundaries that protect this precious truth. You know what the most amazing thing about setting healthy boundaries? Not how you change, but how differently the people around you react to those changes. In the year after my Christmas epiphany, I watched my family members demonstrate very different abilities to adapt, self-reflect, and truly connect. Rebecca, my younger sister, surprised me the most. About a month after our breakup, she sent me a text message that was different from her usual condescending tone. "I miss you. Can I take you out to lunch? Just to talk, without Mom and Dad." I agreed cautiously, but was prepared for the usual patterns. Rebecca talks about herself. I listen. Rebecca seeks approval. I provide it. Instead, she surprised me by asking a question I'd never heard from her before. "How are you?" That first lunch turned into monthly sisterhood meetings, where we gradually rebuilt our relationship on a more equal footing. Rebecca admitted that she had never really thought about how differently our parents perceived us. "I always thought you were strong," she said during one of our meetings. "That you didn't need the attention I received, that you were above it all." "I wasn't strong," I replied. "I just learned not to expect what I never got." These conversations were sometimes painful, sometimes healing, but always real, a quality that had been missing from our relationship for so long. Michael, my older brother, approached reconciliation in a very different way, transactional, as with everything in his life. At first, it was just emails referring clients. "My colleague has a company anniversary coming up. I gave him your contacts." No apologies, no acknowledgement of the past, just business. But gradually, tiny personal moments began to seep in between the business exchanges. "How's your new sous chef?" Or, "Saw your interview in a local magazine. Impressive." For Michael, this was the equivalent of emotional vulnerability, acknowledging my existence beyond his needs. I accepted these small steps, not expecting more, but also not settling for less. My parents, predictably, struggled the most. The first few months were filled with classic denial and guilt-inducing tactics. "You've always been so sensitive. We've always supported you. I don't understand why you're making such a big deal out of this." When these tactics didn't work, they shifted to awkward attempts at connection that at least respected my terms. There were no more expectations that I cook for family gatherings, no more unsolicited advice about my business or personal life, no more comparisons to my brother and sister's accomplishments. In November, almost a year after our breakup, my parents invited me to a small family dinner. "Just the 5 of us," my mom wrote, meaning myself, my dad, Michael, Rebecca, and me. I accepted the invitation, but with clear conditions. I would come as a guest, not a cook. Any discussion of past events must acknowledge my experiences, not dismiss them, and I would leave if old patterns of behavior manifested themselves. To my surprise, they agreed without objection. When I arrived at my parents' house, I was greeted by an unusual sight. My father was setting the table, and my mother was finishing cooking, tasks that would normally have been turned over to me as soon as I crossed the threshold. Dinner was awkward, with cautious conversations about the weather, local news, and new recipes my mom had found on the internet. I noticed how everyone was careful not to violate the invisible boundaries I'd set, like people walking through a minefield, carefully choosing each step. After dessert, my father cleared his throat and pointed to a book on the side table. Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. "We don't agree with everything in there," he said, avoiding my gaze, "but it's helped us understand some things better, especially about how children can perceive the same family in very different ways." Mom reached across the table to briefly touch my arm and simply said, "We're trying to learn." It wasn't a full acknowledgement of the unequal treatment I was experiencing, but it represented more openness than I expected. They didn't apologize. Perhaps they weren't ready or didn't understand how to do so sincerely. But at least they didn't deny my experience. It was a small step, but a meaningful one. As Christmas approached, I observed familiar patterns with a new perspective. My parents began discussing plans earlier than usual, especially emphasizing that everyone was invited. When the formal invitation arrived, its wording was carefully chosen. "We hope you will join us for a holiday dinner where everyone is welcome and equally valued at our table." A year earlier, I would have clung to those words, seeing them as finally a chance to be included. Now I recognize them as the first tentative steps toward correction, sincere, but still limited by their ability to truly understand. I accepted the invitation, but offered to bring only a simple dessert rather than serve the entire dinner. "Are you sure?" Mom asked over the phone, her voice betraying a mixture of relief and disappointment. "Everyone loves your cooking so much." "I'm sure," I replied firmly. "I want to enjoy family time, not work." On Christmas Day, I showed up with a pumpkin pie, simple but perfectly executed, with none of the frills I'd previously tried to impress. I felt centered and confident, not desperately seeking approval. I was contributing to the meeting without taking responsibility for its success. And when uncomfortable moments arose, like when Aunt Carol asked why I didn't make those delicious appetizers as usual, I replied with quiet confidence. This year, I chose to be a guest rather than a cook. The celebration was not perfect. There were moments when I noticed old patterns, how everyone went quiet when Michael talked about his work, but nodded politely when I mentioned a new contract with a prestigious client. There were awkward pauses and the occasional strained smile. But there was also something new, a space for me, a space I had created by setting boundaries, and which, to my surprise, others were beginning to respect. The evening after the family gathering, I hosted a dinner for my closest friends and support group members who had nowhere else to go. My apartment was decorated with special ornaments, representing significant moments in my healing journey. A small ceramic pot, symbolizing the moment I redirected the Christmas feast to the shelter. A silver star reminding me of my first session with Dr. Mills. Colorful ribbons representing the new boundaries I had set. As my guests gathered around the table, I'd set with love, but no expectations, I realized what a long way I'd come. A year ago, I was standing in my professional kitchen preparing a gourmet feast that should have bought me a seat at the family table. Now I had created my own table, where everyone attended not out of obligation or blood ties, but out of mutual respect and genuine care. Looking at these faces, some of whom I had known for years, others who were new friends acquired during this year of transformation, I felt a wholeness that had eluded me all my life. That didn't mean the pain was completely gone. It was still there, but transformed from a sharp, debilitating wound to a tender spot that reminded me how far I had come. Dr. Mills once told me, "Healing doesn't mean no scars. It means the scars no longer prevent you from moving." As we shared food, stories, and heartfelt conversation that evening, I realized the deep truth of those words. I had finally found a way to feed myself that my family couldn't feed me, not with gourmet meals or culinary perfection, but with a simple but profound recognition of my own worth. We all deserve a place at the table, and if there is no room for us at the existing table, we have the power to create our own, with better food and people who really want us.